Are you fulfilling the mission, right? Have a clear mission, and are you fulfilling that? There's something that causes you to get your butt out of bed and put your feet on the floor, but what is it that causes you to take that next step and walk out the door and do it day after day?
This is where it all begins, so say goodbye to all your fears, all your doubts. This is where they die. This is where we come to win, we come to fly. This is where we make our dreams come to life. Welcome to Innovation City.
Welcome to Innovation City, a podcast featuring the innovators, disruptors, and creators making things happen today. My name is Michael T. Johnson. Today we have with us Tyler Kelly, as usual, and Travis Sheridan joining us as a host today on the show. So
glad to be here. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So if you listened last week, we did kind of a highlight of all the St. Louis guests, and today we're going to visit beautiful Miami and hear from all the Miami guests we had. So
no better place to be on New Year's Day than Miami, right?
This is true.
Yeah. So as you're enjoying this on the beach somewhere in Miami, we thank you for listening.
Yeah, and if you're not on the beach, just pretend you are.
Right.
So
and I just want to say thanks to everyone who's tuned in in 2018. Mm-hmm. Over 10,000 listeners, 67 episodes in 2018. This is episode 68. And you've heard this many times, but please subscribe to the podcast, share it with your friends, and leave us a comment. Let us know what you think.
Yeah, and so before we jump into these highlight episodes, I think one of the things that Tyler and I got to see, we had originated our first Venture Cafe experience was in St. Louis. Mm-hmm. So somebody had just told us to go, and we made friends, and we just kind of stuck. So, but getting to travel and see Venture Cafe in Miami, but then at the same time also meeting, we had one event here where we actually got to meet, I think, almost everyone in the Venture Cafe organization.
You did, yeah. We had all the teams from around the world here one week, so that was kind of fun.
So I think one of my observations from all that is every time I think I've met, I think this is the smartest, most well-connected person I've met. I meet somebody else in the organization and I go, oh no, I think that may be the smartest person that I've met. So first off, hats off to finding all these smart people. But also,
fair, we want to know how you recruit.
We want to chat later, because we want all those smart people in our organization.
Whenever we hire a new one, I always feel like my grandmother with the grandkids. Like when we hire a new one, I'm like, oh, you're my favorite. You're my favorite. And then we had another one, I'm like, oh my gosh, no, this is my favorite. We have a tremendous team around the world, really in almost all corners of the world that are driving innovation in their own communities. And Innovation City has been able to highlight innovators in 2 of those locations. It would be great. I know we've talked about a grand plan of taking this on the road or on a plane. But the fact is, it's not just that we hire great people. These great people have great hearts, and they have a heart to help about seeing innovation to really change the world and impact the world.
So how many Venture Cafe locations are there today?
So as of this recording, there are 7 operational, and number 8 will become operational probably in February. It will launch, which will be Sydney, Australia. So we have 3 internationally, which Sydney, Tokyo, and Rotterdam, Netherlands.
And then, talking about all these great people you have around you, how many people does it take to pull all this off across the globe?
So I think we have about 55 employees totally within the Venture Cafe family around the world. The smallest team is Winston-Salem, North Carolina. It's a team of 2. The largest team, of course, is probably in our Boston operation. They've been around for almost a decade. They have a team of about 11 to 12.
And then apart from that, you have volunteers and ambassadors that make stuff happen.
Volunteers, ambassadors, and then on my global team, I have a team of 6.
So it's a lot of people making this happen.
It's a lot of people making it happen.
Yep.
It's a lot of people bringing a lot of people together. In 2018, we had just over 100,000 people participate in Venture Cafe over on the Thursdays. And each week now we have over 2,000 people coming together around the world. It's phenomenal to think about that many people doing the same thing all over the place.
Yeah, wow. That's really cool. And so you've heard us say this every single episode, but it is the largest gathering of innovators, disruptors, entrepreneurs anywhere in the world. So
yep,
on a
every
Thursday
week,
night.
yeah.
Get there on a Thursday night. I'm super excited about this episode because I spend a lot of my time in Miami. especially in the winter.
Yeah, not a bad place to be.
Yeah.
Right.
So, I call most of these people, my friends, if not all, right? And so I can't wait to jump right in and see what we have.
Yeah, let's do it.
We have this light inside of us that we need to let shine and illuminate really brightly, but we dull it and dim it down sometimes because we don't see those role models. It's really easy to question yourself in an environment where you don't see people who look like you.
Someone told me recently there has never been a publicly traded CEO that from zero to publicly traded that was African American. So one of my goals is to actually be the first to ever IPO.
Overall, YouTube is a fantastic platform, and frankly, I think companies like Viacom shot themselves in the foot and caused themselves irreparable harm. One of the many reasons why WatchMojo became this massive pop culture phenomenon is because they didn't put VH1 and MTV's content on, the platform YouTube, and we filled that void.
We're like scratching the surface of like our capacity as people. We are like operating here, most of us. We probably could be operating here. But in operating here is not necessarily doing things all the time, but sometimes it's like literally creating the space to let good ideas come to you.
And so our conviction is when we see something in the world and we know, you know what, that's just not right. That tears at my heart. A calling is then answering that pain, that discomfort, and doing something about it. And I think those are important starting places for a hero.
A company at the end of the day it's a family, right? You spend 8 to 10 hours a day with these people, and they become part, kind of like your family. So if you don't care about them, and if you don't care about what they care about, then what's the point?
A lot of times when I went into boardrooms or pitch competitions, the audience or the people that are the decision makers don't look like me, so they might not understand where I'm coming from. The only person that knows your story that well is you, and you have to do your research and your confidence to stand your ground.
I grew up in an environment where your ability to instill fear in other people was an asset. I believe when you're vulnerable and seek help and willing to admit fault, then you have control over the narrative.
When I was diagnosed with breast cancer, I had to figure out who I really was because my whole life was dependent on what I looked like. And so when I got my health back and I was able to stand on my own 2 feet, I decided, well, if I'm going to be standing, I need to stand for something.
Any obstacle that comes my way, I analyze it now. And I'm like, okay, well, obviously this is showing up for a reason. This is showing up because I need to fix something or I can improve something. And I just take advantage of that, then work from there.
Our country was literally founded on the principle that you can start a business. You can absolutely fail, but you can start over. We encourage you to think out the box. You may not win the first time, but you have to keep going.
Make sure that if you're going to be doing, tech, you're going to be doing entrepreneurship, it's for the right reasons. It's because that's something you're passionate about. I'm firmly convinced that no matter what industry you're in, you are in a tech industry. You need to be able to adapt to the digital transformation that's overtaking every single industry.
Entrepreneurship's been a little glamorized, and there's a lot of grit and just inconvenience involved in it. But it's kind of you're delaying pleasure to tolerate the pain in that case.
When we go to communities that we consider at risk, they're often perceived with mistrust early on because in some way, shape, or form, the community in which we're engaged, they don't actually know what the motive is. Why would these smart, talented kids come into my neighborhood and want to do something with me, not for me?
Instead of looking at the world from a very Western approach, I've been able to grow where I see that problems have different solutions.
And so we had to kind of shape our business practices into their community and their culture.
I think the one thing that will happen more as Miami matures more is people will come to embrace failure. There's a little bit still, I think, in Miami, a stigma of failure. People are embarrassed to be wrong. They're a little bit embarrassed to fail. But I think the more transparent we can be about our successes, our fails, the more honest we can be, the better.
A lot of people growing up or living or residing in impoverished communities, they don't know their options because they have not been exposed to options, right? Once you expose individuals to their options, they're a lot more open to exploring, but you gotta lead them.
One thing I have to credit myself with is I try my best to not get hung up on things that I might be afraid of doing. So I usually just take a deep breath and just try and see what happens. And it usually works in my favor.
This is like the new Wi-Fi. Today, whoever doesn't offer free Wi-Fi will not see any tenant or any visitor visiting those places. Same is happening with the charging station. At some point, we will reach a critical mass that even if you are not jumping into that wagon, even if you are not offering that service, I mean, you will see a shift of your tenants, your visitors, your residents going elsewhere.
Something that a lot of Miamians don't realize is the fact that we are a cultural capital in the world. And what sets us apart from other cities that are cultural capitals is our cultural mix. You won't find this kind of cultural mix anywhere else in the world.
So I lived in the very, very southern region of Venezuela in a place called San Fernando de Apure. And it really stayed with me that the basic rights that we have in our society, they don't exist in a lot of places. And that's when I came back very convicted that whatever I did in my career, I wanted to make sure that I made an impact on the world.
Your heart's telling you to do something and you following through is an act of building your confidence. And that applies to everything that you do, every moment about being your true self, taking the mask off, ending this game of I need to be like everyone else, and instead really stepping into your powers and owning who you are.
I push entrepreneurs in South Florida to really think about, from day one, think about a larger market. So what does it look like for you to be a US company? What does it look like for you to be a global company and to go in that direction?
We're so disconnected from even our waste, right? So out of sight, out of mind, we don't understand what's happening. But once you are responsible for the damage you create, then you start questioning and finding alternative ways that essentially are not that uncomfortable.
Always follow the money. Like Facebook, Google's, they're all investing heavily in AR, VR because I think we're in the brink of the whole worldwide community understanding these technologies and seeing how they will fit realistically into our everyday.
I feel like writers need to, in a sense, unionize. Like publishers and magazines, they would be nothing without the content creators behind them. So why is it that we don't have more power in that situation?
As social beings, you know, I think that we all thrive when we feel more connected to each other. And so it's just trying to figure out, you know, how do we show like the benefits of having like a diverse, inclusive city or county?
Are you solving a problem? Sometimes the problem is unknown. That might be the biggest opportunity, but make sure you're always solving a problem. If you're trying to invent something that's not going to solve a problem, there's no market need. Don't waste too much time on that because it's not going to work.
We look at people's cognitive ability. So can you do it? Are you capable of learning how to do it? And then what's your motivation? And that's actually more important than the cognitive piece. And if we see a match between those two things, in 10 weeks of full-time intense effort, we can get you to where you can be a contributing developer at a company.
Start small and start testing. A lot of people, once they actually start doing, realize I don't actually like this idea as much as I thought. And that's so totally okay. We just want people to learn that. So I think that's one big piece of advice that I would definitely give to anyone starting out.
Find your niche. Put on more of a innovator hat when you're looking at what you want to do, and try to find the problem so that way you can create a solution for it. Don't just kind of go in and like, yeah, I just want to fit in and do it. No. Really sort of help to be a change agent in whatever it is that you're looking to get into.
More good nuggets, more good knowledge there. Very similar to last week's episode and the clips that we shared there. A lot of this has to do with just being human, connecting to people, being passionate. There was one thing that I really, that stood out to me was Tina Brown that mentioned it. And she was saying that, you know, people from under-resourced or poorer communities just don't know what their options are, right? And this goes back to several other people talking about role modeling as well. You know, one of the things that we try to do through Venture Cafe is allow it to be a gateway so people can see what those options are. And another person that was interviewed talked about taking off that mask, right? That vulnerability plays a very key role if you're ever going to move your idea or venture forward. And I think that's people. Somebody asked me the other day, do people ever steal ideas at Venture Cafe? I'm like, not really. Like I have never heard. If we've had almost 400,000 people attend Venture Cafe, I have never heard a single situation of this guy stole my idea. And it's because when you have a community, you have trust inherently built into that, right? And you don't want to jack that up. by stealing somebody's idea. I think this, what you feel like you could gain by stealing, you will lose by breaking that trust. And so that idea of a place that's safe where a person can be vulnerable with their weird ideas and take that mask off is really crucial.
Yeah. Plus, I think most of the venture cafe people are probably too busy with their own idea.
Oh, yeah. I had a professor when I was at one of the universities say that if you drop your business plan in a crowded room at MIT, somebody might pick it up and they would it would take them 18 months before they caught up to where you are now. Like, that's if they're even interested. But for the most part, people aren't interested.
Yeah.
You guys have spent a lot of time in Miami. I want to ask you a question now. I'm interviewing you.
Yeah.
One of the gentlemen mentioned it being the cultural capital, and I think in startups we always talk about venture capital. But how important has it been, as you've been down there, to see this cultural capital that exists in Miami?
Yeah, who do you want to take it, or you want?
Well, I'd say that it's extremely important when we think of the region, the South Florida, the Miami region's potential. That the growth that they're experiencing, I think it's because of their diversity of cultures, of nations that converge there, the all out community that we see in Miami. It's critical that diversity is there. That's what I called in a video a while back ago, one of their superpowers, right?
Yeah, it's an absolute superpower. It's probably unmatched anywhere else in the United States.
And they can't forget that, as a lot of capital is flowing into Miami right now, and we're seeing the city being built up. Like, we have to remember that that's why they're where they are, right?
Yeah, I think the observation from Miami is that it's not like St. Louis, but it has like a similar position in St. Louis, where and that's in a social one, where St. Louis has had kind of this racial issue. It also is an opportunity for, as that issue is worked out, for that to expand and have like an impact on the nation as a whole. And we see the same thing in Miami, like, because Miami is so diverse and has people from all over the place. It has its own unique set of problems that, as they work through those problems, the solution to those problems spreads, and it helps the rest of the world and the United States and things like that. So I think there's a parallel there in their uniqueness and their positioning, really, for what they can do.
Yeah. And you guys just opened I am really interviewing you now, so I apologize. You guys just opened an office there recently. Yeah. And what was it about Miami? You spent a lot of time there. What was it that said, this is now the place where we want to open an office? Was it part of the people that you met, or what was it? And then we can go back to your podcast that you want me to be a guest on.
Well, I think that just like St. Louis, Miami, when I really think about the city, is it's underestimated. And because of that, it's a tier 1 city that really has never had the recognition that a New York or Chicago or LA has had. But I walked into an artist's studio, and he's a famous 3D artist. His name's Mark Diamond. And he, in 3D, showed what the skyline of Miami will look like based on approved permits over the next 10 years. And that skyline is greater and more massive than Manhattan's is currently right now. So that's the amount. There's probably like 30 or 40 cranes at any given time.
Yeah, like I counted one day.
City, yeah.
I counted one day. I was in the room where we shoot Innovation City, and from what I could see from one window was 17 cranes.
Wow.
And I think every time we've flown back into Miami, there are new buildings somewhere. Like,
they build buildings a lot faster than we do.
Yeah, they go up pretty quick.
Well, so that's one of the reasons why. It's just like this pure growth potential, and landing in a community that is still, it hasn't really come up to where we know it's going to be. So just getting on the ground floor of something amazing.
Well, and I think that what a lot of these interviewees have shared, and there was one in particular, there is still this risk aversion in Miami, right? That you don't want to be seen as a failure. Maybe because it's such a visible city, like it is. People are very visible there. They all are beautiful. They all are smart. Their buildings are beautiful. It's sunny. Everybody's looking at Miami. And so when you fail, there's a lot of eyeballs on you. But Monique, who you also interviewed, said, like this country was built on people failing and getting back up. And so if we can go back to creating environments, if we create an environment where people can fail and not let that stigma of failing hold them down, but stand back up, then you could probably thrive in a place like Miami because you have this culture and this community that's there to support you. So it's like this mix of how do we take advantage of this asset, which is a sense of community and identity, and use that to overcome this fear of failure and risk aversion.
Yeah, I think Mina mentioned in the clip that people thrive when they're connected to one another, which is that when I look at Miami, because it is a tier 1 city, what we're seeing is that there are a lot more resources pouring into Miami than what we're used to here in St. Louis. And so what that means is like Michelle with WinLab, a lot of the major corporations like Chick-fil-A coming into Miami and doing work there. The Emerge conference, which I think is one of the largest just tech conferences, period. So there's just a lot that's happening, which makes it exciting. Yeah. And that's just in the last, 12 months, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So let's jump into some of these clips. So the first one, I think one of the coolest experiences for Tyler and I, apart from just like the quality of guests, was for one of the trips down to film Innovation City, we actually partnered with University of Miami, and they built this crazy glass booth for us on Emerge Americas. So we got to go on the floor there, do the podcast live, and it was just a really cool experience. So the first clip is going to come from there. So we actually had the privilege to interview Dr. Julio Frank, who's the president of the University of Miami. And also has like his accomplishments through his life are just amazing if you don't know his backstory.
Former dean of Harvard, former minister of health for the country of Mexico.
Wow.
Amazing resume.
It's not very difficult to be generous to your family and friends. You know them, you love them. What's really tough in this world is to be generous to total strangers. Being generous to strangers is the biggest test of our humanity.
He has an amazing story because he, like several of our other guests, went through extreme personal difficulty just in his childhood, fleeing Europe during the Holocaust to, come to a new country and thrive. And so, amazing story.
Well, and, one of the last pieces he mentioned there was the importance of showing generosity to strangers, right? And anybody that has survived a war-torn country, sometimes your family and friends are no longer with you, right? They've either been captured or killed, or you're all alone. And it's only through the generosity of strangers that you can really not just thrive, but survive. And just think about when a person's taking a risk of launching their own business, right? Sometimes they're alienated by their family. Their parents would rather them just have a normal job. Their friends all have normal jobs, and so they don't get to hang out at work anymore. It's very lonely. And so entrepreneurs and innovators have to find a community where they can have that support. And it's generally first built on a community of strangers where the only thing they have in common is the craziness and the risk taking. But the more that we could show that generosity to strangers and that kindness to strangers, the more that we're going to grow as a society.
And speaking of just surviving and thriving as a society, our next clip is from Janice Rosario Shoup, and she works with a community health and trying to solve some of these issues from like the macro view of how society handles health issues. Check this out.
You need to have the right people at the table because you have to have a shared value and a shared vision. Without that, you're not going to get the job done.
I mean, that connects exactly what we said for the last clip. When you're trying to do something that's big and kind of invoke this incremental change, you need the right people at the table with you.
Well, so much of our history has been about people trying to penetrate or find a seat at the table, tables that they weren't invited to. And what I'm seeing from innovators now is they're saying, screw it, I'll build my own table. Yeah. Right? I'm not going to wait for an invitation. And we see this a lot in the nonprofit sector. And I preach against this all the time, these nonprofits that are trying to encourage young people to get involved. And so they patronize them by saying, here, serve on our junior board or our young friends of. And I'm like, that's BS. Like, maybe they can't write the big checks, and that's what philanthropic nonprofits want people to write big checks. But they still have a sphere of influence, and don't invite them to a subpar table. This isn't Thanksgiving. There's no kids table for annoying little kids to be at. And by the way, if you're doing this, don't just ask all young people to be your social media managers too, right? Run our Snapchat. But what Dr. Shoup said is that we need to have not just seats at the table, but we have to actually create new tables. Because as we create new tables, then those that created it can be more responsive and responsible to inviting other people around that table.
So the next clip. So this has been like kind of one of my favorite episodes, this next clip. So, and I know the clip isn't going to tell this woman's story, but she had basically like failed over and over and over at her business, but she just kept pushing through. Her name is Pilar, and she has a company called Half Moon Empanadas. And so from what I know, she's an inspiration to everyone around her down there. So
the other question is, what does success mean, right? That's a big question. And to me, if you wake up and you feel well, happy about what you're doing in your life, then that's success. Yeah. And that's how I define it. Yeah. And I feel happy about what I'm doing.
Yeah, talk about the $1 million question for startups, right? And people doing innovation. I think when like most news outlets are reporting on who's raised this X number of dollars, right? It's not even about how much revenue they're generating. It's just like how much money they've raised. And because the media is promoting that, then we start saying that that's the definition of success. But as Pilar said, you wake up in the morning and you're feeling good, that can be a success. It is crucial for entrepreneurs and innovators to think about what those aspirations are. I've said that a couple of times. What are those aspirations? How do you define success? And it's better to have internal definitions versus just relying on what the external people might say. Yeah, because a metric won't necessarily pull you through the really hard time. It's your own internal motivation.
100%. We see cases all the time, people making lots of money and they're not happy, and so what's the point? Right? Or they're raising lots of money and their customers aren't happy, or whoever they're serving isn't happy, right? And I also don't even think it's just about happiness. I mean, I think that plays a key part of it. But are you fulfilling the mission? Right? Have a clear mission, and are you fulfilling that? There's something that causes you to get your butt out of bed and put your feet on the floor. But what is it that causes you to take that next step and walk out the door and do it day after day? I always tell people that starting a business is actually pretty easy. Everybody thinks it's hard to start a business. I'm like, no, day one, that's the fun part. It's like day 2 and 3 that are a bitch, right? So you may have to bleep that out, but it's like. You have to, that success, incremental success, the well-defined success is what keeps you coming back and forth to running this business. So next up is Sam Abbasi from Bushido Labs.
You get to build stuff when you find the intersection between science, technology, and art, is what I think. Science and tech can get you so far. Like, you have the rigor and testing of science, you have the innovation of technology, but then you have the creativity and frankly the audacity of the actual arts. When you are able to make that combination, then you really start to create things.
So the interesting thing about that episode is that it was about cryptocurrency, which I do not understand that well. So it was education for us, but he was also like mining stuff on his laptop while he was talking to us. Didn't want to waste any time with that. So yeah.
I mean, I guess Miami is probably one of the perfect places to combine science, technology, and art. Like, they do it so well down there, and they make it all look very seamless. And we direct kids into the sciences and to engineering, but it's the audacity of the arts, as Sam put it, that's really going to help take something that might be fundamentally strong but not very creative, and actually take that fundamentally strong thing and knock, crank it up a notch.
So our next clip is from Howard Herring, who is doing this in the art world at New World Symphony. And so he has implemented some pretty amazing optimizations to the symphony in order to bring in the greater community and provide access to the Miami community.
Cultural institutions, buildings themselves, mean very little unless you develop a program to cause your community to be a better place. So all of us in the cultural world here are now developing these programs with these wonderful facilities as our resource.
this is what Howard is saying is true about anything in the world of real estate, about space itself. And Miami, you were mentioning all the cranes. They are building more and more spaces, but without the programming to go into it, the purposeful reasons for people to connect within, then they are just shells of buildings. And I think the Symphony and our cultural institutions get that. They know that they may have a beautiful piece of architecture, but if the program inside isn't compelling, it's not going to bring anybody else inside. But you even think of this, and we look at innovation districts or physical real estate spaces that people might live in. We need some compelling reason to create community within those.
Yeah. And then so we have this last clip, and I've saved this one for last because I think this has kind of summed up our Miami experience. And so this was just on, I think, a very recent episode. So this is Raul Moas, and he's with the Knight Foundation, which has a lot of influence in Miami, and they've done a lot of good things there. But he explained to us very well, like the culture in Miami and why it is the way it is. So let's hear from him.
Before the 1960s, Miami was still very much a sleepy kind of beach town. Our founding is courtesy of Julia Tuttle, who convinces Henry Ford to bring the railroad all the way down to Miami. And it kind of grew, but it wasn't any sort of a metropolis. And in the 1960s, when the Cuban diaspora comes, it kind of opens the door so that anytime a country in Latin America experiences some sort of destabilization or turbulence, Miami kind of receives that diaspora. We have a little Haiti, we have a little Managua, we have a little Caracas, and so as of late, there's been a large influx of Venezuelan immigrants. And so Miami is equally American and Latin American, right? It's either, it doesn't belong to either, kind of is part of both. And just inherent in part of the immigrant experience, the exile experience in particular, is kind of a hustle, right? You're seeking out a better future. And I think that's true for America as a whole. Whether you kind of settled the West, whether you were the Irish or the Polish, or even kind of the founding fathers back in the day that came to the colonies, you were looking for something better, right? And so that hustle, that ethos, that desire for the American dream, to be more, for your kids to do more and have more opportunities, that's ever present here. So what you see a lot of in Miami is kind of almost an overrepresentation of small and micro enterprises, kind of necessity-based entrepreneurship, immigrant-led, right? People who are coming here because they want to do something that they physically can't do in their home countries. And so that has kind of really informed a lot of things here. The city is not a city of corporate kind of towns. One of a fellow Knight city is kind of the St. Paul, and even St. Paul, kind of the Twin Cities, have like half dozen kind of major companies like Cargill, Targets, et cetera, that are there. Miami isn't really a headquarters kind of town. We're very much a town of builders and makers and merchants, right? This isn't a corporate town. This isn't a town where you have these large corporations that are like the employer. This is a town where folks come to build something. We're seeing the latest iteration of that now and what's happening on innovation, entrepreneurship, the knowledge economy. We're seeing folks that are saying, this is a fun place to be, it's a cool place to be, it's a funky place to be, it's like nowhere else in the country. We can build software from anywhere, courtesy of the last 15 years, and you're seeing them more and more do it here. And that intersection in particular of Miami being kind of the welcome mat or kind of the foyer of the United States for diasporas bodes well in the sense that the folks that we're getting, they want more, right? They're hungry for more, and they're building more.
You mentioned the founding fathers. I just can't see too many of them like being hustlers, other than Ben Franklin. Like Ben Franklin was probably a hustler. Everybody else was probably just like old dudes. But I really... I loved his interview. This was a great interview. I'm going to go back and listen to the entire episode because I hadn't caught this one yet. But Miami is at this really interesting. It's the foyer, right? It is welcoming people to the U.S., but it's not like people are necessarily running to the U.S. because they're excited about what's here. Sometimes they're maybe more afraid of what they're leaving, right? And I think we have to be very sensitive to that when people are coming here, they're coming with literal and figurative baggage. But many of our immigrant populations are highly entrepreneurial, right? They will start their own micro enterprises. They're both entrepreneurs and merchants. I appreciated Raul saying that because they also buy local means a lot to them, right? Yeah. The Haitian immigrants are going to buy from other Haitians, and the Cuban immigrants are going to buy from other Cubans. And I think we miss that as just general Americans, is that we really should be doing more to buy and support our own local communities.
Yeah, I think on that note, it was 2018 was an amazing year for Innovation City. So I want to thank you for the opportunity,
sure,
to opening up Venture Cafe's doors to kind of allow us to share some of these stories. And we're looking forward to 2019. So
I'll have to warn you though, if you go to other venture cafes to like do the show, so far every venture cafe you've gone to do the show, you've opened up an office there and moved there with creating a team. So, Slam Agency could be a very global team pretty soon if you're going to venture cafes, doing these shows, and suddenly falling in love with these different communities.
Well, you might just have to help us with some of your HR processes. I think but thank everyone. Thank you all for listening, for tuning in on YouTube and other places. We couldn't do this without you tuning in, without you sharing, liking, subscribing. So keep that up, and we promise to bring it even greater this year.
Thanks for listening.
For more episodes, visit innovationcity.co. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. And if you're in Miami, visit us on Thursday nights. Details are at venturecafemiami.org. And be sure to connect with us on social at We Are Slam and at Venture Cafe MIA. Thanks for listening.
This is where it all begins, so think about